Keir Starmer, once regarded as the calm, measured, and principled face of the Labour Party's revival after the turbulence of the Corbyn era, now stands at the epicenter of what many in Westminster are privately calling the most severe crisis of leadership the party has faced in decades, as the political heat has risen so sharply that the calls for his resignation have moved from whispered remarks in corridors and quiet murmurs in party offices to demands echoing through social media, street protests, and public statements from former allies and critics alike, creating an unprecedented atmosphere of urgency, anger, and disbelief. What started as an ordinary session of Parliament rapidly descended into chaos when a deeply sensitive internal Labour document, previously buried and inaccessible to the public eye, surfaced unexpectedly, causing immediate political tremors across all factions. The memo, which contained details of sweeping policy shifts, internal strategy plans, and controversial backroom deals, was never intended to leave the party archives. Yet by 11 a.m., one courageous but visibly nervous Labour MP shaking with a mix of defiance and apprehension stood to read the document aloud line by line in the House, leaving colleagues, journalists, and the public in stunned silence. The contents were explosive: plans to impose strict immigration caps, expand state surveillance powers, and negotiate covert arrangements with foreign investors, some allegedly connected to governments with records of human rights abuses, alongside a single sentence that would become the symbol of the crisis: electability over ethics. The words hit the chamber like a shockwave. Gasps reverberated through the House as MPs struggled to process the betrayal inherent in their leader's own documents. The Speaker's attempts to restore order failed almost immediately, leaving the chamber in turmoil. Conservative MPs jeered and mocked Starmer openly, calling him a coward in silk, while members of the SNP stood and chanted for a full inquiry, making the political disarray clear for all to see. Even veteran Labour backbenchers, some of whom had been loyal supporters of Starmer's rise, sat frozen, pale-faced, and speechless, their expressions betraying a profound sense of personal and political shock, realizing in that moment that the careful image of disciplined leadership and moral integrity Starmer had cultivated over years had been shattered. Within minutes, social media erupted. Hashtags such as #StarmerResign and #LabourLeak dominated Twitter and Instagram, trending globally, while coordinated protests began forming outside Parliament, with crowds holding signs declaring, "We voted for integrity, not secret deals," signaling a public feeling of deep betrayal, not just by the party but by the fundamental principles of representation. Matters escalated further when Angela Rayner, Starmer's deputy and a figure long seen as a stabilizing presence within Labour, unexpectedly stood, shot a piercing look at the front bench, and left the chamber without a word, leaving journalists and the public to interpret her silence as an unmistakable signal of internal fracture and disapproval. Sources later revealed that she had been deliberately kept out of the loop regarding the leaked memo's contents, and felt blindsided by the revelation that Starmer was steering the party toward a more centralized, technocratic leadership, sidelining internal democracy, and consolidating power in ways that alienated even his closest allies. Downing Street, unusually quiet, issued no immediate comment, though whispers suggest that Rishi Sunak and his advisors were closely monitoring developments, ready to respond should the situation provide political leverage. Buckingham Palace issued a rare statement confirming that King Charles had been briefed about the situation, an indirect but clear sign that the monarchy was observing the instability and viewed it as a potential threat to national stability, adding another layer of gravity to an already explosive political moment. Meanwhile, ordinary citizens, already exhausted by the ongoing cost of living crisis, NHS strikes, housing shortages, and an overstretched asylum system, expressed deep disillusionment and outrage at what they perceived as yet another betrayal by those entrusted to govern responsibly. Grassroots labor groups and trade unions quickly mobilized, issuing public letters of condemnation, temporarily halting donations, and questioning their faith in a leadership that had long claimed to restore moral integrity and transparency after previous scandals. By mid-afternoon, the party's internal machinery was beginning to grind to a halt. Regional leaders held emergency meetings, councillors began resigning, and candidates withdrew their support, reflecting an extraordinary loss of cohesion and confidence at every level of Labour's organizational structure. The situation intensified when, at 4:37 p.m., an anonymous whistleblower, allegedly from within Starmer's communications team, leaked a second set of encrypted documents to multiple media outlets. These files contained strategies for marginalizing dissent within Labour, including plans to blacklist MPs who showed insufficient loyalty, regardless of whether they had broken any rules, raising profound ethical questions about the party's internal governance and creating a perception that principled criticism was being treated as a punishable offense. The revelation that democratically elected officials could be targeted for political compliance sent shockwaves through the country, shifting the narrative from mismanagement to outright authoritarianism within the party, with commentators, citizens, and former MPs questioning whether Labour had abandoned its own stated principles in pursuit of centralised control. News networks quickly responded. BBC call lines flooded with irate citizens. LBC hosted extended debates with listeners expressing fury and disbelief. And Sky News went into continuous live coverage, while social media platforms such as Twitter, TikTok, and Telegram became arenas for the public to demand accountability and ask whether the party that had once promised transparency and integrity had instead become the embodiment of the very abuses it once opposed. Reports surfaced that some MPs named in the leaked blacklist had gone into hiding, receiving threats and harassment despite their roles as elected representatives acting in good faith. Insiders confirmed that many of these individuals had not leaked information but were simply critical voices, committed to principle rather than loyalty to an individual, highlighting the degree to which internal party dissent had been criminalized or marginalized under the current leadership. In a stunning twist, David Lammy, Labour's shadow foreign secretary and a close ally of stepped forward at 6:02 p.m. to issue an unplanned, emotional press statement outside Portcullis House, with no podium, no flags, and no stage, declaring that he could no longer defend a leadership that treated internal democracy as a hindrance rather than as a foundation of political integrity. Lammy's statement, calling for an immediate emergency leadership review, effectively fractured Starmer's inner circle, setting off a cascade of resignations, public denunciation, and an unprecedented grassroots revolt. By the evening, local Labour branches across the United Kingdom, from Scotland and the northwest of England to parts of London, had passed formal, no-confidence motions, with tens of thousands of party members voicing their fury in meetings where they tore membership cards and walked out in protest. On the streets, demonstrations multiplied as ordinary citizens, including students, pensioners, NHS workers, and lifelong Labour voters, gathered in unprecedented numbers outside Starmer's constituency office in Holborn and St Pancras, demanding that the party's leader resign. The size of these protests grew rapidly, reaching over 2,000 people in the first hours, holding signs declaring, "Not in our name," and chanting in unison for accountability and a restoration of public trust. One elderly man, representing a generation that had supported Labour for decades, broke down in tears, shouting, "He promised us decency. Where is it now?" While the protests raged, Starmer remained absent from the public eye. His official car was spotted leaving Westminster around 5 p.m., and then he disappeared entirely. Rumors circulated wildly. Some speculated he was drafting a resignation speech. Others claimed he was holding private meetings with advisors to strategize a survival plan. And a few even suggested he had temporarily left the city to escape the mounting pressure. His prolonged silence only intensified the public and media scrutiny, creating a vacuum of leadership at a moment when decisive action and clear communication were urgently needed. By the following morning, newspapers across the nation ran scathing front-page headlines. The Times announced Labour in meltdown, Starmer cornered by revolt. The Daily Mail mocked him as Sir Keir the Silent, while even The Guardian, historically cautious in its critique, published a hard-hitting editorial demanding immediate accountability and leadership change. Television networks abandoned their scheduled programming to air continuous interviews with former MPs, union leaders, and constituents, all echoing the same refrain: Starmer must step down. Yet, still, no statement emerged from the Labour leader himself. Journalists camped outside his residence for more than 10 hours, only to be met with silence, further fueling public perception that the party's leadership was in chaos and detached from the people it claimed to serve. Behind closed doors, sources revealed, Starmer convened an emergency summit in a secure London office, attended by party lawyers, crisis advisors, and the few loyal MPs remaining, with the primary agenda focused solely on survival. Discussions reportedly included damage limitation strategies such as a possible televised apology, selective reshuffles, and even a temporary stepping aside to calm the growing unrest. Yet no consensus was reached. One staffer remarked privately, "We've lost the room. We've lost the base. We've lost the country." By mid-morning, Labour's regional chapters escalated the revolt. formally issuing no-confidence motions and accelerating the pace of resignations. Over a third of the shadow cabinet had resigned or temporarily suspended their roles, and the country's largest unions, including Unite and GMB, issued a joint statement citing a catastrophic loss of faith in the party's leadership. The scale of the internal collapse was unprecedented in modern labor history, leaving political commentators, journalists, and party members alike stunned at how quickly a once stable leadership had disintegrated. Meanwhile, Conservative MPs, sensing an opportunity to press the advantage, demanded a full parliamentary inquiry, and Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, unusually solemn, asked publicly, if he cannot lead his own party, how can he ever lead this country? The chamber fell silent, not with cheers or jeers, but with a collective acknowledgement that a political threshold had been crossed, and that the events of the past 48 hours had fundamentally altered the perception of governance in Britain. By the afternoon, mass demonstrations were erupting across major cities, including Manchester, Birmingham, Bristol, and London, culminating in a massive 50,000-person gathering in Trafalgar Square, where citizens, representing all walks of life, demanded accountability and transparency, carrying banners reading "Restore Democracy, we want leaders, not managers, and no more silent betrayals," reflecting a deep sense of disillusionment that transcended traditional party loyalties. In a remarkable moment of civic engagement, Major Colin Harris, a retired Army officer with no prior political involvement, addressed the crowd impromptu, articulating a sentiment of collective dismay that resonated nationwide. "We serve this country because we believe in honor, but what we see now is dishonor at the highest levels. This isn't just about one man. This is about every backroom deal, every silenced MP, every voter who trusted their leaders and got lies instead. None of us fought for this." His words struck a chord, crystallizing the moral outrage and solidarity of the people standing outside Parliament and in streets across the UK. After more than 30 hours of silence, Starmer finally appeared outside Labour headquarters, looking visibly fatigued and strained, as the nation collectively held its breath, eager to hear a response from a leader who was no longer just facing political criticism, but a profound crisis of legitimacy that threatened not only his position but the very perception of representative democracy in Britain, a crisis that had been set in motion not by opposition parties or rival leaders, but by the very systems and documents created within his own party, exposing a rift between principle and action, trust and betrayal, leadership and silence, and casting a long shadow over the future of British politics that would be discussed, debated, and dissected for months, if not years, to come. As the country waited to see whether Keir Starmer could survive this unprecedented political upheaval, restore confidence, or whether history would record this moment as the definitive collapse of a leader once hailed as the moral compass of his generation.